Hey, and welcome to episode number 106 of the Brave Widow Show. Before we dive into today's episode, I just want to remind you that we have the back to school bash for widows that is happening the week of August 19th. We're going to kick it off with a What's Next webinar on Monday, August 19th from 10 a.m. to noon Central. And I'm going to teach you the sneaky little grief things that are happening in the background that are keeping you feeling like you're stuck in grief, that keep you feeling like you're going backwards, that keep you from knowing how to move forward. If you're headed in the right direction, are you focused on the right things? I am going to lead you through this webinar and help you uncover the exact next steps that you need to take to move forward, not only through grief, but beyond grief. And in recreating this next version of who you are, I am so excited about this webinar and I want you to join me. To sign up, go to bravewidow.com/next, NEXT, like what's next. You are going to learn on the webinar. It's free. It's open to the public. You can bring a friend. Go to bravewidow.com/next to join us. All right, let me introduce Elaine. Elaine is a 43-year-old mother of two young ladies, ages 10 and 13. She's a pediatric occupational therapist and is also the clinic director of an outpatient pediatric therapy clinic, IV Rehab for Kids, in King of Prussia, Pennsylvania, which she opened in September of 2022. She and her husband, Chris, were married in November of 2007 and raised their girls in Orland, Pennsylvania, his hometown. Chris passed suddenly and tragically in a helicopter crash in December 2023. Since his passing, Elaine and the girls have been surrounded by their friends, family, and community in order to make their new normal as smooth as possible. Elaine is thankful to her girls for giving her the motivation to get out of bed every day, as without them, her path might have looked a bit different. All right, let's dive in. Elaine, welcome to the show and thank you for coming on today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very, very excited to be here.
Absolutely. I'm excited to have you. So, I know our audience would love to know more about you, more about your background. So, would you mind to share some of that?
Sure. So I live in the suburbs of Philadelphia. I have lived here my entire life. I live in a little town called Orland, Pennsylvania, which is about 30 minutes outside of Philadelphia. I am an occupational therapist. I work with children. I have worked in pediatrics for just about 20 years now. And most of that time has been spent in outpatient pediatrics. I work for a company called IV Rehab for Kids, and we provide physical, occupational, and speech therapy to children ages birth to 21 with a variety of diagnoses or needs. I opened a clinic in King of Prussia, Pennsylvania in September of 2022. And so I am the director of that clinic. I was married for just about 17 years. I met my husband in July of 2004. So that was coming up on 20 years. We met at a bar. So fun story, but we met at a bar
Okay,
and
so we got to know how, because everybody wants to know like how to approach the other person, how to show interest. So give us the
he
details. What happened?
he literally sat down next to me at the bar. It was a bar called Brownie's 23 East. So anybody around my age that maybe went to Villanova or St. Joe's would know that one very well. So sat down next to me. We started talking. He always joked. This was one of his favorite stories to tell because he always joked that he bought me a $20 shot and he bought me a Jaeger bomb. And so it was like an $8 or $9 a person shot. He had no idea that that's what it cost, and so he was always happy that he was thought that was very funny. So we exchanged numbers, and he said, when we exchanged numbers, he said, what did he say? He was like, I am not good at calling people. And so I was like, okay, whatever. And so we get to the parking lot, and my friend was driving, and I was like, well, I'm just going to call him right now. And so I called him right from the parking lot, and I said, okay, you said you weren't good at calling people, so I called you first. And he called me back a couple days later, and he at that point forgot what my name was. He
Oh
thought my name was
no.
Steph. So he left a message for Steph. And then, yeah, I mean, after that, we went out on our first date a couple of weeks later to just this local. I was sick, so I didn't really feel like going anywhere. And so we just went to this local dive bar for dinner, and that was it. We got married just about 3 years later, a little over 3 years later. And then we had our first child 3 years after that, and our second child 3 years after that. So we built a really, really great life together. We had so much fun together. And yeah, we're just planning for the future. And then December 19th happened. So my husband, which he always loved telling this as well, was a camera person in a local news helicopter and loved talking about his job, loved telling people that he flew in the helicopter, and people ate it up. People loved to hear that because they were like, wow, that's awesome. What kind of stories? Where have you been? All this stuff. So on December 20th, early morning at 12:21 a.m., I was awoken to just the most horrible banging on my door, banging doorbell, the whole thing. And so I have a Ring camera on my front door, and looked at the camera, and I knew exactly who it was. It was another pilot that he had worked with. And I ran downstairs, opened the door, couldn't breathe. Like my cats got out. Like it was just, and he said just essentially that the helicopter went down and another news helicopter found it. Um, they didn't have any word at that point in time whether or not there were any survivors, anything like that. So didn't know anything at that point. And so I just gathering myself, breathing, trying to breathe, trying to just wrap my head around what was happening. My kids were upstairs sleeping. So he's like, well, what do you want us to do for you? And I'm like, I have no idea. Like, what? Like, he's like, well, do you want to go to the airport? And I was like, no, I don't. Like, why would I go to the airport? Like, and he's like, well, that's kind of ground zero. I was like, I can't leave my kids here. I was like, I'm not leaving my kids with a stranger, like for them to wake up to a stranger. Like, I just can't do that. And so then he leaves, and I called my mom, I called my father-in-law, I called my husband's brothers, I called my brother, and I called my husband's best friend. And I just said, there's been an accident. I don't know what's going on. The main reason why I started calling people right away was because I didn't want them to find out on the news.
Right.
Because I knew that the news, this was going to be just a huge story. And so called them. My mom comes, and we just sit and wait. My work friends, if they listen to this, are going to roll their eyes and start laughing. But I started working because I was like, well, if he's alive, I'm going to have to take care of him. Like, I was like, I'm going to be in the hospital for months. Like, that's what was going through my mind at that point. And I had paperwork I needed to finish. And so I started working because I was like, I got to get this done. That was like all I could think about at that moment was, what is my life going to be like? And what I got to be prepared. And so about 3 hours, I also had called one of my closest work friends. She actually lives in my neighborhood. And so I said, hey, I need you to clear my schedule. Like, I was like, I need you to do that. And so about 3 hours later, around 3:30 in the morning, I got the official call that there was two fatalities. So it was him and the pilot, of course. And so then I made the round of calls again because I was like, I again don't want them to find out on the news. And then my friend that I just spoke about, her and her husband live close by, and they came over at 3:30 in the morning, which meant the world to me. And my mom was here as well. And then it started with then people started finding out on the news. So I started getting text messages and messaging, and I wasn't responding really to anything at that point in time. But so then I had to tell my children. And so I waited for them to wake up. And I have
And
a
how old were they at this point?
so I have a 10-year-old and a 13-year-old, both girls. The 13-year-old woke up first because she goes to school first, and I called her down. And so she was confused, obviously, because my mom was here. Like, why would my mom be here? It's 7 o'clock in the morning. And I told her, I just said the helicopter crashed. And she said, "Is he dead?" And I had to be like, "Oh, yes, of course." So that was difficult. So then I waited. My younger daughter usually doesn't wake up till closer to 8. I think I woke her up early because I just couldn't wait anymore. Like I just had to tell them. So then I woke her up and brought her down and told I was more blunt with her. Like I just was because she saw my older one, Kira. She saw my mom, and she was super confused. And I said the helicopter crashed and he died. And she didn't react. She sat there with just this blank face, didn't cry, didn't nothing, nothing. And I didn't really know how to react to that. So that took some time before she really kind of got it. I think in the days ahead, there was so much hustle and bustle around here. I mean, it was craziness, just people in and out, and just constant food and like all of that. And like one of the craziest stories was I had my hair done in the dining room. My friend was like, "Elaine, you need your hair done." I said, "I not a concern. I am not concerned about my hair right now." She's like, "Nope, it needs to be done." And she came over and dyed my hair in my dining room. And still will always be one of those pivotal memories of that time. So, yeah, I mean, that is the story of kind of what leads me to being here today. I'm almost 6 months out. And the reason why I was eager to be on your show is because podcasts have been a huge part of my journey in my widowhood, in my grief, in my healing, I guess, in my journey forward. So I wanted to share my story just to kind of share those details and share what has kind of led me here today. So, yeah.
Oh, I think that's one of the most beautiful things about people that go through that sort of pain, widows in general, is that you're so giving. Like you look at things that have helped you, and even though you're still in that 6 month window, you think, how can I help the person who's behind me? Like, how can I help the person that's 1 month out, that's 3 months out, that thinks that life is over and it's never going to get better. It's never going to look any different. And they have no idea just what to expect. And so,
Mm,
thank you for doing that and for being willing to be so vulnerable with your story, because I do think it helps encourage and inspire people who are earlier on in their journey.
mhm. Yeah, I mean, at the very beginning, in the first days and weeks, I was in complete and utter despair. I didn't know my one of my other core memories is saying to my neighbor, "Hey, will you teach me how to cut the grass?" I was like, "I don't even know how to start the lawnmower, and I still don't." It was my husband. So because of his work schedule, he alternated working days and nights. So we were kind of like ships in the night, especially when he worked night shift. We wouldn't see each other. We always joked, like we'd say goodbye to each other on Monday morning, and then I would joke, I'd be like, all right, see you on Saturday, because especially when he worked nights, we really wouldn't see each other. With that being said, he was home a lot more than I was, especially during the day. So he would go food shopping, he would clean, he would cook, he would make us meals that I just had to heat up. So I didn't cook. Like I could follow a recipe, but he could open the refrigerator and pick out the most random things and put a delicious meal together. That just wasn't me. Like I just didn't. So I worked. And he recognized that. So he took care of the lawn. He took care of all the yard work. I mean, I really can't take a ton of credit for a lot of things. He did so much. And when all of this happened, I went into just a complete tailspin of how am I going to do this? How am I going to do this? The money and just survival, like just complete and utter, how am I going to do this? And I'm still figuring it out. It's going to be ever changing as my kids get older and as whatever else changes. But we were blessed with support. We were blessed with support from just people wanting to help, money donations. We had a concert benefiting us. My husband was a musician, and so he wrote his own music and played the guitar and loved to go to open mics and all of those types of things. And so some of his friends put together a benefit concert for us, which I'm hoping to keep going. So that'll be awesome. But at this point, at 6 months out, I figured out how to cook. So my girls and I plan our meals and we go to the store or I have it delivered. And that's probably the one area that I'm most proud of, is that I figured out how to feed my children.
I resonate with this so much because I traveled a lot for work and
Mhm.
my husband stayed at home and just did all the cooking and took care of everything. And so the crock pot and I, for like the first few months, became best friends because I could throw everything in there, go do what I needed to do, and come back. And it wasn't like everything had to be perfect. But I used to be that person that had like the measuring cup with the ingredient. It had to be perfectly measured and it still would
Yep.
never taste as good as what he could do. So I know people
Yep.
look at me funny when they're like, what do you mean you didn't used to cook for your family? But I didn't have to.
Mm-mm.
And learning to cook when you are a little older in life is an interesting experience.
Yep. Yep. And there was one time where my daughter wanted ribs. And I was like, oh boy, all right, I'll make ribs for you. And I did it. They tasted good, everything was good. And my youngest daughter, who is a huge fan of ribs, was like, Mommy, I think these are better than Daddy's. And I took that as a huge compliment because
Oh.
that was the first time ever that I had made ribs. And I credit him because I watched what he did. I listened to what he said. And so there was things that I now have just learned from him. And so I credit him for that. I take a page from his books every once in a while to be able to do that. So yeah. So I mean, I went back to work after 7 weeks. My birthday was the beginning of February, and so I wanted to get through my birthday. So I took off the entire month of January and I went back the first week in February. And I'm grateful to my company, my closest allies, that they are just so supportive. And I was so blessed by them that they were willing to work with me. And I took a slow transition back to work because of my kids, really. My oldest daughter she's always been a little bit more anxious, and she was afraid. She didn't want me to go back to work because her dad died at work.
Mm.
And so she was afraid that something would happen to me. And so we had a rough month of January. She was ill a lot. She had a boot on her foot. All this, we had a rough. We also had to I went to in between the end of December and the middle of February, I went to 4 funerals, one being my own husband's. So we had his 2 uncles passed away, and then I also went to the pilot's funeral that was held in early January. So we just had a rough month. It was just a rough period on top of dealing with grief, and she didn't want me to go back to work. And so one day I drove her there just so, I mean, she had been there before, but just so she could see where I was going. And at the very beginning, I had to text her when I got there, and I had like a notification, and that still happens. Like a notification goes to her phone when I arrive at the address, and she's doing fine now, thankfully. But it was heartbreaking. It was really, truly heartbreaking, like to think of what was going on kind of in her brain of like why she didn't want me to go back to work. And so, yeah. So I still aim to be home before they get home, even though school's ending now tomorrow, but just so that way I'm here. Because there was generally, for the most part, he was here when he was working morning shift. He was always here for them. So I try to be always here for them just so that way they're supported in that. But they're doing much better with that now too.
I think it's great that you have the ability to do that and to help recognize when they're feeling anxious or when some of those things are coming up for them. How would you say everybody's timeline is different, but how would you say you are, or how are things different 6 months out from when you lost him?
I would say now I'm less overwhelmed. I would say that there are more good days than bad. It's not to say that I don't think about it every single day or think about him every single day. There's still moments where I'm leaving work and I'll be like, oh, he'll be home. Nope, he won't. And that's just your wiring of your brain. You're used to that pattern. And so that's diminished a bit. But yeah, we've just had a lot of firsts since then. We had his birthday, we had my daughter's promotion from 5th grade. We have Father's Day coming up. We had Christmas. We had Christmas 5 days after he died. Yeah, like I couldn't drive for 2 weeks. I couldn't. I think back to those first few weeks of and where I couldn't really maintain a conversation. My memory was really poor. My executive functioning was really poor. I couldn't drive. My conversational skills, as I said, were just I'd be talking and then somebody would ask me a question and I completely forget what was happening. So my sleep was really poor. So I would say now, yes, like my good days are more than my bad days. I am sleeping better now. I have until probably about a month ago or 6 weeks ago, I everything was centered around my kids. Everything, and we barely left each other's sides with the exception of school and work. And so I decided a couple weeks ago that it was like I need to start having time to myself. And so I identified that I'll leave for a couple hours, like on a Sunday, and just go for a walk. Or I luckily have had plans recently, so I've been able to get out and just kind of have adult conversation. And other than that, if I'm not able to do that, I just try to have moments by myself. Like, I know a lot of people out there don't have childcare or have really young kids or whatnot, and for whatever reason can't. I'll just go to my room for a while and just scroll my phone or read or watch TV or something, and just to take a break, to just shut my brain off for a second. So I think now I have the ability to kind of identify what I need and what's helpful to me. And I think the kids are the same. I think the kids kind of go through their moments. They've been in therapy, I've been in therapy, and my outlook for this summer is to just really enjoy this summer. Is to just we're kind of I said to their therapist, I said, I just want to take a break. Like, just take a break. And not that we're not going to grieve, but just to kind of focus on some other things. And yeah.
I love how you said that you are trying to find some time for yourself, which is really important. And that when you don't have that bigger time to take for yourself, that you are still taking those moments. I know with my kids, I would say, okay, I just need some mom time. Like, I just need to shut my door.
Mm-hmm.
Don't, please don't bother me unless there's an emergency.
Mm-hmm.
And just feel like I could be like, just
Mm-hmm.
relax, just think about something else, just not have someone tapping my shoulder every 5 seconds, like just have some time to myself. So I think it's really great that you did that. What
Yeah.
what was it like as you were transitioning back into work, and are you still like in the same role as what you had, and you foresee that for the future, or how has maybe your view of what you do changed over time?
I am still in the same role. I'm still doing the same job that I have done for the last since I opened the clinic, but I also had the same type of role for about 5 years before then. Nothing has really changed as far as my job. I'm still doing it, still doing the best that I can with it. I'm trying to think. I lost track of what I wanted to say. Oh, work kind of gets me away. The reason why I went back to work somewhat quickly, some people were like, "Oh, you're going back already?" Like, that's I needed to get away from the house. I needed to get away from food because I would sit, I would watch TV, I would eat. Maybe I'd fold laundry. Maybe I'd do a little cleaning, something like that. I also had a lot of projects to do as far as like there's lawyers involved. I had a lot of stuff, just the usual kind of social security and like all of those things that you have to do when someone dies. But work is kind of the place I go to kind of get away from it. Not many people know. Of course, my coworkers know, my team, and some of very limited amount of parents know, but it's kind of where I go to just think of something else and to kind of just get away from it all. And so I kind of dive in. I dive in, I've gone back to doing what I was doing before. And I just truly do my best. Some days are better than others, but I truly do my best.
Yeah, that's great. And I went to back to work really early, but we had been both of us had been sick for a few weeks, and so
Mhm,
it just was like I wanted a sense of normalcy. I wanted to not think about sickness and death and all of those things. Like I just wanted to think about something else that felt somewhat normal
mhm,
as opposed to what I'd been living those past few weeks. So
mhm.
I think that's totally understandable.
Yeah, and I think it was the routine too, of just having a routine. The kids were on a routine. They went back to school the first week in January. As soon as school opened back up, they were back. And I got them back on a routine with the help of the schools, of course. I had a lot of phone conversations with teachers and principals and guidance counselors and the whole thing, but they were on a routine. And then, so I took the month of January for myself, and that was great. And then by the time the end of January came around, I was like, okay, I need to get back into this. And I needed to think about money. Like I needed to get back into it in order to start earning money again, even though we were blessed, as I said, by donations and things like that. But, I still have the rest of my life. Like I'm only 43 years old. And so needed to kind of think about my future and the kids' future. They still have a lot of big events to come. And so I want I want to live the best life that we can live. And so that's kind of the other impetus of it, was just kind of like, okay, let's start thinking about our future and how we're going to get there. And that's kind of where I'm at now.
Mm. And what kind of support have you had with whether it's family or friends or people just around you? Did you feel like you got a lot of support or how has that been?
Yes, ton of support from friends, family, neighbors, school district. My husband grew up in Orland. So we live now in the town he grew up in. And so we got so much support from the high school he went to, from friends that he knew growing up. Um, everybody. I mean, it came out of the woodwork. We got tons of food and, as I said, the donations and just offers upon offers to help me with just driving my kids around mainly. That's the main thing I've needed help with. And or people just do it. They're like, "Oh no, we'll take them or we'll do this or we'll do that." So, and it's still now, of course, it's declined. Like 6 months out, it's life for them went back to normal, right? After everything happened, maybe even after the funeral. And so my life didn't, my girl's life didn't. And so, of course, there's people I can call if I need anything. Of course, both of our families are more than willing to help if I call. And so it really has been great. I have a bunch of friends, and as I said, my neighbors are all more willing, very willing to help. So I'm very, very lucky. Very
Mm.
lucky.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Mhm.
It's great to have so much support around you, even though over time, naturally, that does decrease. But it's really
Mhm.
nice to have that where you can, or to be confident in asking for it specifically where you need it. As those kids turn
Totally.
into teenagers,
Mhm.
I feel like part of my job is just being Uber mom, like just taking them everywhere. So it's a lot.
Yep. It is. It is. Especially all the sports and the practices and the games and just their social events too. Like, hey, I want to go to this friend's house or that friend's house or this person's party or whatever it is. And it's exhausting.
Mm.
It's
Yes.
exhausting, but
Yes, it is.
we manage. We manage.
Well, Elaine, what advice would you give to people who they wake up in the dead of night, they get that same news that there's been an accident, their spouse has died, they have two kids or a few kids at home. What advice would you give to them when they're really just in the thick of it?
To take it one day at a time. I would wake up and I would give myself one task to do. And I would do that one task, and that was it. Like, one example was I had to find my husband as many of my husband's W-2s. And I said, okay, I'm doing this today. This is what I'm doing. And because it was exhausting, everything was exhausting. Doing anything those first probably 6 weeks was just completely and utterly exhausting. So, my main advice is to just give yourself grace. If anyone asks if they can help you, say yes. A lot of people will come, what do you need me to do? And my answer is, I don't know. Like, I don't know. I don't know what I need you to do. So people would just find things to do, honestly. Like, but yeah, like if somebody offers to do anything, just say yes and give yourself grace. If that means you're going to bed at 8 o'clock, 7:30, you're going to bed with your kids, go to bed with your kids. Just do it because you need to rest. You need that time. And that is probably the biggest advice is to just give yourself grace, take your time. Nothing has to be done right away. And each day will get better. I always noticed a difference weekly, like every Monday. I would be noticed like, okay, this this week's feeling better. The next week, okay, this is feeling better. And then something would happen. Like my husband's birthday hit me like a ton of bricks. And I wasn't necessarily expecting that. I knew it was going to be difficult, but I didn't think that it would take me 2 days to recover. I almost thought about calling out of work. That's how bad I was feeling. And so that's my advice too, is to just know that there are going to be days that aren't good. And that's okay. That's part of it. That's what grief is. And 5, 10 years down the road, we still may feel that way on those days, and that's okay.
Yeah, I totally agree. Grief can be so exhausting, overwhelming, and then you think about all the administrative things that you have to do, just notifying different companies, getting paperwork, gathering documents, finding passwords, just there's so much. It can feel really overwhelming. And I remember my dad telling me something similar of like, well, just think about what has to be done today. Like, not
Mhm,
everything on your list has to be done today. So, what are the things that have to be done today? And only worry about those right now.
mhm,
And tomorrow we'll have other things that you can focus on. So, well,
totally.
Elaine, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your story. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Are you a widow who feels disconnected? Do you feel like you're stuck or even going backwards in your grief? Widowhood can be lonely and isolating, but it doesn't have to be. Join us in the Brave Widow membership community and connect. We teach widows how to find hope, heal their heart, and dream again for the future. Find your purpose and create a life you love today. Go to bravewidow.com to get started.